Hi, Earl Warren families. We're back as we draw together even when we're apart for our last lesson for the month of October. And this whole month we've been talking about grit in art. We've talked about artists who've persevered hard things. We've talked about artists who overcame great hardship and great disabilities. And we've created some pretty neat projects. Well, this week is no different. We're going to talk about a very famous artist, probably one of the most famous artists in the world, and somebody who had a lot of grit and a lot of things to overcome in his life. Before I tell you who it is, I'm going to show you some pictures of his work. The first one is a self-portrait he did of himself, and then there are some paintings that are famous that he has created. And as you look at them, I want you to look closely at the colors. I want you to look closely at the texture. Does it look smooth or rough? I want you to look at the way that this artist used his brush strokes. Did he do long and smooth brush strokes or short and quick brush strokes? I want you to look at what kind of colors he chose and what kind of subject he chose. Goodness, I need to get back in school too. So let's look together at just a few of the paintings that this famous artist created. His stuff is pretty awesome, isn't it? Lots of bright colors, lots of short, quick brushstrokes. Did you notice those? It wasn't like there were big sweeping brushstrokes, but little quick dashes almost. You could see his energy as he painted. He painted outside, he painted inside, he painted landscapes, he painted still lifes, and he painted his own bedroom. But there's one painting that he is particularly famous for, and we're going to paint that today. But before we do, I need to tell you who it is, and I need to tell you a little bit about it. So this artist's name was Vincent van Gogh. You might have heard that name before, or at least his last name, Van Gogh. And he was a Dutch artist born in the 1800s. And he had a lot of hardship in his life. He was very poor when he was young and didn't get to do art at all because he had to work in an art store. He didn't get to be an artist. Then he went to school and got kicked out. Then he fell in love and got rejected. Then he went and tried another job and he was fired. And then he got sick all the time, even to the point where he spent the last days of his life living in a hospital. Well, it was in this hospital that Vincent van Gogh painted the painting that we're going to study today. Let's look at it together. So let's look at this together. This is called Starry Night. You can see that there are swirls of stars and there's a moon up in the corner and a dark set of trees in the foreground. You can see the dashed brushstrokes that we talked about, almost like the sky is alive. You can see that he primarily just used blues and greens, a little bit of white, a little bit of yellow. But this is one of his most famous paintings in the whole wide world. And we are going to make our own version of this painting today. This is my version of Van Gogh's Starry Night. And you can see that I used short, quick strokes. I did the blues and the greens and the yellows and the whites, some black. And I used some pretty basic art supplies. I used crayons and watercolors, and that's all. Pause the video and go get your watercolors, your watercolor brush, and your crayons. And you'll also need a little cup of water too for your watercolor brush. And then come back and I'll teach you how to draw Starry Night. What we're going to do is we're going to draw it with crayon first, and we're going to practice those short little strokes using our crayons first. And then we're going to use our watercolor paints over the top of the crayons and do a watercolor resist to create our whole project together. Let's take a look at the painting that we're going to be working on today. Let's just look at some of the shapes, and I'm going to trace them with my fingers as I talk about them, so when we go to draw our own version, we can remember what they look like. We're going to start off by drawing these trees. And if you look at them, they really look like flames almost. They're just a squiggle up to a point and then back down again. Same one for this little tree, a squiggle up to a point and then back down again. Then after we draw the trees, we're going to draw the hills in the background. And hills are easy. It's just a bump, 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 bump right across the page. And in Van Gogh's picture, there was almost like a little black top hat, maybe it's a pile of rocks or a cliff or something on top of that hill. So we might add that as well. There are some other little hills kind of in the closer to the trees. There were some bushes that are those same little bumps, but they're just a little bit smaller. And there are even some bushes on this side of the tree over here. And then Van Gogh drew the village that he could see outside of his window. He drew a little church, and then he just drew some other buildings, houses, and who knows what else. And these are pretty simple shapes, just some rectangles and some trapezoids, some triangles, some little rainbows filled in. They're actually pretty easy once we break down the shapes. So we're going to draw the trees, then the hills, then some of the closer hills and bushes, and then the buildings. And then after that, we're going to focus on our sky. We're going to draw the moon. We're going to draw the stars. We're going to draw this neat, swirly, Milky Way looking thing that goes across. And we're going to use all of these little short crayon strokes before we apply our paint on top. So let's get drawing. So first thing we're going to do, we're not going to use a pencil. We're just going to use our crayons. And you can see I broke my black crayon when I was practicing. And that's fine. I'm just going to use a half of a crayon. In fact, I might even peel off the paper. For this project, I really like to use the back side of the crayon. So this part right here, for getting those short, thick paint strokes, I like to use this part of the crayon instead of the pointy part. You're welcome to try anything, either the pointy part or the thick part. But I'm going to draw those two trees first. And remember, it's just a squiggle to the top and a squiggle to the bottom. Squiggle to the top. Now, I'm placing my tree about 3 fingers away from the edge of the paper. I squiggled to the top, and then I'm going to squiggle to the bottom. There's really no right or wrong way to do this. Whatever yours turns out like, it will be great. Right next to that, I'm going to do another one a little bit shorter. I'm going to squiggle to the top and squiggle to the bottom. That's all I really need to do. Now, I do want to add some of those short strokes inside of my tree that will peek through after we apply the watercolors. So I'm going to use that thick, fat side of my crayon, and I'm just going to draw some lines, some short strokes. And it doesn't have to be, look how I'm just doing it kind of fast and quick and kind of staying in those lines. But I'm just adding some movement to my trees. Kind of so it looks a little bit like the leaves, but I'm just going in the same direction as my squiggles. I'm going up with my squiggles, and I'm just using that black crayon. For fun, I might add a little bit of some purple lines. Secret, I'll tell you. You guys know that I paint a lot of landscapes. And almost always I use purple inside of my trees. Then I'm gonna do a little bit of the green. We're not filling it in, we're just making some of those short strokes because we'll cover this over with watercolor in a little bit. Okay, so now that we've done our squiggly trees, let's put those hills in the background and our little top hat on that hill over there. I'm going to do my invisible drawing first. I'm going to start on the left side, and I'm going to imagine a hill there. My hill's going to peek between these two trees, so there'll probably be a little part of the hill there.
And then I'm gonna do 1, 2, 3 more hills over there. Again, I'm gonna use the back of my crayon and I'm just gonna go a hill. That one's gonna connect there. And then I'm gonna go 1, 2, 3 to the edge of my paper. So I started on the left edge and I ended on the right edge. And then remember we had that funny looking little like rock top hat, kind of like Frosty the Snowman's hat or like a boot or something that we put up there. After those hills, we have some hills that are a little bit closer in the foreground. So we're gonna just draw a few more little hills. We might do some of these little shrubs. See, they look just like hills, but with smaller little bumps. So we'll draw those. And we'll also draw some buildings in the foreground. Remember, this is the view that Van Gogh had from his hospital window. This was the town he looked out on. And so he was drawing what he saw. He saw a church building and maybe a house and some other buildings over here. You can really draw whatever you want. I'm just gonna draw some rectangles with some triangles on top and imagine that their homes or places that people live or places of business. They're not a really big important part of the painting, so don't stress about it if you don't feel like you could do that very well. Even just some rectangles to kind of look like buildings would be good enough. I'm going to use the back of my black crayon again, and I'm going to draw these hills, these little bumps, maybe these little bushes over here, and a few buildings in the foreground. Go ahead and grab your black crayon and draw with me. So there we have our hills, our bushes, our buildings, and now we're just going to take this black crayon and we're going to add just some of those quick short strokes that will give us some shading and some detail later in our painting. So I'm going to use the flat part of my crayon and I'm just going to put some big, thick stripes on my hills. I'm going to do some maybe on my bushes. I might even press a little bit harder on some of my drawing, because remember, when we do watercolor over crayon, the crayon likes to poke through, especially if we did it nice and hard. I'm going to do some strokes on my rooftops. And am I being really particular and trying to be super neat and orderly? Nope, I'm just having some fun. So I'm going to do some stripes over on my bushes. And again, remember, we're doing those short, thick strokes. Right now, I'm just using some black, but I think I'm going to come back. Let's see, let's do a lot of black up here on our top hat. I think I'm going to come back. Maybe I'm going to add a little bit of blue. Remember that Van Gogh really likes to use blue and yellow. Those are kind of his favorites. And he likes to use a little bit of green. I guess my bushes will probably have some green in them. I might add a little bit of green. Again, I'm not being too particular about this. I'm just adding some interesting short strokes. They don't even have to be super fancy. And I'm doing them in some different directions because we want to have exciting movement in our painting. Maybe I'm going to add a little bit of purple here. And then you can go ahead and add some more strokes to your buildings. I'm going to use some different blues and greens. Really, even the buildings were almost all blues and greens. I am going to do something kind of fun, though. I'm going to take this white, and it looks invisible right here. But I'm doing a lot of white on that church so that when I put the paint on it, it will stay kind of white. And I'm going to just do some of these, just these quick, short strokes in white, just kind of all over the place as little surprises to see what happens when we put the paint on top. I might make the front of this building kind of white too. All right, so we've got this whole section pretty much done. Now we get to do the sky. So let's look at this sky together again. In Van Gogh's painting, there is a moon in the upper right-hand corner that he did in orange. And then all of his lights have these kind of halos, these sparkly circles around them. And I'm going to tell you a funny story about him. it turns out that Van Gogh probably needed glasses, but he didn't know it. And so when he saw things, he saw them with especially lights with a halo around them. And I want you to do a little experiment. I want you to squint your eyes and find a light in your room, whether it's a light bulb in a lamp or look up on your ceiling, and see if you can squint your eyes enough so you can see kind of a glowy square or a glowy circle around your light. That's how people think that Van Gogh saw the stars and the moon. So he was painting what he saw. So we're going to do the same. We're going to start with our moon, and then we're going to do our big swirl across the sky, and then we're going to add our stars. So let's start with our moon together. Grab an orange, and we're going to do that moon up in the upper right-hand corner. To do that moon, we're just going to do a big C, and then a little C to make our moon. And then I'm going to take the back of my crayon, and I'm going to make some of those Van Gogh short, thick strokes. Then I'm going to take my yellow, again using the back of my crayon, and I'm going to do a backwards C in a dashed line. Now when I say dashed line, this is what I mean. We're going to do a lot of this in the sky. A regular line looks like this. A dashed line looks like this. And a dashed wavy line looks like this. And a dashed circle line looks like this. If you want to pause your video and practice those on a separate piece of paper, you could. Just practice making those dashed lines. Maybe you could even do the first letter of your name. My first name is Kelsey, so I would do a K with a dashed line. We're going to do a lot of those dashed lines. So let's do some of those dashed lines around our moon. So I'm going to make a dashed circle line, and then I'm going to go around my moon again in some more of those big Van Gogh chunky stroke dashed lines. I used some yellow. I might add a little bits of orange, and I'm definitely going to add some white. And even though you can't see the white, I promise you that the more white you do in these halo circles, the cooler it's going to look at the end. And make sure that you're pressing nice and hard. We want nice, big, thick strokes. Okay, so we've done the moon. Then now we're going to do that cool swirl that goes across the sky. I'm going to do mine with yellow so you can see it. And then we'll do a lot of white for the swirl. So I'm going to do my invisible drawing. It's going to swoop like this behind the tree, come up and around. It's almost, if we turn our paper this way, like doing a letter J with a curly tail. So if you want to do it this way, you can. We could do that dotted line behind there, come here and make a J. And then let's curl that tail around. We're having a very fancy J today. And then I'd go back and do some more and make it a thick J. I'm going to add some white to that. Again, remember we're using lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of, and I'm pressing hard. You can tell that I break crayons all the time because I hold them really hard sometimes. I'm doing lots and lots and lots and lots of white, and I'm following those same directions. So can you hear how loud my crayon is as I'm tapping the paper? And I can tell I'm pressing hard when I'm tapping the paper like that. All right, so that's our first swirl. Now I'm going to do a little baby swirl down here and swoop it off that way. I could turn my paper like this so the moon is in the upper left-hand corner, and I could make another J right here. Watch this. I'm going to make another J with a swirly curly tail like that. And I'm going to go back with my white and add lots and lots of those Van Gogh dashes. Now that I've got it this way, I'm going to just take that white and I'm going to make some dashes just right above my hills. Because in the regular painting, there's a kind of a white cloud that hovers above the hills. All right, now let's do some stars. And the stars are fun. For the stars, we're gonna just put them wherever we want. We're gonna make a little yellow circle, and then we're gonna do that dashed circle line around it, and then lots and lots and lots of thick white dashes. So why don't you make some stars along with me while I make some more stars? I might put some orange in the center of some yellow in the center of some, but let's do it together. All right, so we have our swirls, we have our moon and our stars, and now we're just gonna add some more of those chunky Van Gogh strokes in our sky following the same direction. And I don't know about you, but I was kind of excited when I dumped out my crayon box. I always dump out my crayons so that I can see all the colors. Whoops, one of those just fell on the floor. I think you have 5 different colors of blue, and if you look closely and read them, this one says indigo, this one says cerulean, this one says beautiful, this one says blue-green, and I don't know what the one that I just dropped on the floor is called. But you can use all of these in your sky and just make some of these chunky strokes. Remember how we had those J's? We're just gonna make some fun strokes like we're a snake slithering across the sky, or like we're a breeze blowing through the sky. And I'm going to use all of those blues. I might even put a couple of these colors inside of my J's just to make it a little bit interesting. So I'm putting some of these swooshy big Van Gogh chunks in all these blues because he loved blues. Alrighty, we've got our big chunks, we've got our foundation, and now it's time for paint. So make sure that you've got water in a cup or a jar, you've got your paintbrush, and you have your watercolor paints. We're gonna start by painting with our yellow. And the reason we're gonna start with the light color is that it won't get muddied by some of the other colors. So I'm just gonna put a little bit of yellow just around a couple of spots. I'm not going to do a lot of yellow, just a little bit in the middle of our stars. But then we're going to do our sky. And in your watercolors, you have dark blue, light blue, and kind of a dark purple. And you can use any of those any way you want. So go ahead and have fun. And when I'm painting, I'm going to go follow the path of the swirls. So I'm going to make my brush, I'm not going to scrub. Remember, we never want our paintbrush, woo, almost knocked over my camera. We never want our paintbrush to look like this. If it starts to look like that, that means we're pressing too hard. We want our paintbrush to always be smooth, like a little candle, okay? So I'm going to be brushing my paintbrush left to right and following the flow of the sky. So I'm going to paint the sky first. Then I'm going to go dark blue on my hills. And then I'm going to go black on my trees. And then whatever I decide for my buildings. Van Gogh's buildings were mostly blues and greens, but maybe you want to make yours a different color. So I'm going to paint. You can watch or you can paint along with me. Notice as I'm painting that I am painting right over the tops of my swirly stars. I'm taking that blue and going right across the swirly J's because I want that dark blue to be resisted by those light crayon strokes. Isn't that cool? So when I put that dark blue on top of those light crayon marks, they jump off the page. Even as I use this dark purple, you'll see that I'm going to use a couple different blues, and I just go right on top of my swirls. So don't paint around them, just paint right over the top of them. That I painted my whole blue, but it's not dark enough for me. And with watercolor, you always start light and then you go dark. So you can always add more color in watercolor, but you can't take away color. So you'll see as I paint the rest of this painting that I'm going to go back up into my sky, and I'm going to add some more dark circles up in my sky. Anytime I add a little bit more paint, I'm making it darker so that it contrasts.
So here we have our finished piece. I hope you had fun watching the crayons appear from underneath the watercolor, and I hope you had fun pretending that you were Van Gogh. But I want to tell you one more thing about Van Gogh as we finish off our month talking about grit. Van Gogh painted more than 8,000 paintings in his life. And guess how many he sold? One. Van Gogh sold only one painting when he was alive. Nobody really liked his art, but it didn't stop him. He loved it. He felt like it's what he was made to do. And so even though other people didn't think it was necessarily cool or what they thought he should do, he knew he was an artist. And so he kept on painting. Now, guess what? After Van Gogh died, people started to appreciate his art. They started to find his paintings and want his paintings. And guess what? Recently, one of his paintings sold for $82 million. Isn't that crazy? So, even if you are doing something and other people don't understand it, but you love it, it's okay to have grit and perseverance and keep on doing the thing that you were made for. I hope you had fun this week. It sure was fun for me to pretend to be Van Gogh for a little bit and to draw together even while we're apart.